Thanks for tuning in to the HR Uprising podcast. I'm your host, Lucinda. The HR Uprising is focused on helping forward-thinking people professionals deliver real lasting value in their organisations. I'm a chartered psychologist, speaker and trainer, and recently authored the best-selling business book, How to Be a Change Superhero. My day job is founder and CEO of software and training business Actus. This gives me the opportunity to work with other businesses like yours. We are focused on building a better workplace for people wherever they are located, with the help of our performance, learning and talent management software and our training and consultancy services. Every week on the podcast, I will be covering different topics and challenges, joined by relevant experts and real-life people professionals. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really hope you enjoy and get value from this week's episode. Hello and welcome to this week's HR Uprising podcast. And this week we're going to focus in on the importance of building strong relationships. And I'm delighted that I've got Tracey Abayeta with me, who is an HR director who specialises in talent development and is particularly passionate about the importance of building relationships and how that links into career development. Tracey, thank you so much for joining me on the HR Uprising podcast.
Thank you, Lucinda. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, obviously, I've given you a little introduction, but you've got quite an unconventional past, haven't you, along the way? So do you want to tell us a little bit and introduce yourself in a bit more detail?
Sure. So I didn't actually grow up in HR and started my career in investment banking back in 2008. And that was a function of the fact that I studied economics at the University of Nottingham, and that's what everybody did. So I applied to internships, and I feel like HR is a very hidden profession. So people don't really know about it, and nobody wakes up saying, I really want to be an HR professional. But I think the signs that I was destined to work in HR was definitely there. So I've always loved people and been interested in supporting them in their development. So when I think about the time when I was in banking, I was the one that was always putting my hand up for attending recruitment events to find talent for the business. I would support our interns when they joined the firm, making sure that, they knew how to navigate and help them prepare for their final presentations. And anything that revolved around people, I was often there. So early on in my banking career, I started thinking about HR, tried to make the switch, and it didn't quite work internally where I was. And then I moved to an education to employment charity, where I spent probably about 6 years supporting students from ethnic minority backgrounds, low social income backgrounds, and helping them get into investment banking. So whilst it wasn't, necessarily a traditional HR role, it was there that I really had the opportunity to work with people and found my passion for nurturing talent. So my first HR role was actually 5 years ago, where I currently am. And my role has ranged from recruitment to DEI, and now kind of really focused on talent development. And I always tell people that now my career mission is to help organizations get the best out of their people. But I think, my time in the business has definitely helped with my understanding and my empathy as an HR professional.
So it's been a bit of a vocation for you then, going into HR and then linking, it sounds like quite values driven, if going in from investment banking, sort of, my perception would be fairly high, hardcore money driven, to a charity, which must have felt really different. And not only that, guiding people to be more successful in investment banking. That's a great sort of Venn diagram or connection of what you've done there. I mean, did you find it very challenging to go from one environment to another?
So actually, it's quite interesting, because the charity I moved to was the charity that helped me get into investment banking. So I had always been very connected to it and offered myself as an alumni volunteer. So I was always involved. And actually, as I think about my journey, which is why I'm really passionate about this topic on building relationships, all of my kind of work opportunities came through relationships. So when I realized I wanted to move and this opportunity came up, I believe it was the relationships I had built with the organization, because I was, an alumni that came back, gave back. They knew my work and were willing to let me do the role, even though I had never done the role before. And then even how I got into my current role as an HR professional, they used to be a client of the charity that I worked at. So again, it was a relationship that opened the door for that opportunity, rather than me applying for these opportunities, kind of on LinkedIn or going through an agency. So that's why I'm really, so yeah, it's all very connected, even though it does seem quite different.
And I suppose that's exactly you're modelling what it is that you're passionate about. So one of the things a term you use when I've spoken to you about how you describe yourself, you talk about being a relationship capital coach, don't you, along those? So do you want to explain what you mean by that?
Sure. So I think relationship capital speaks of the strength of our professional relationships. And, I was listening to, a message last week, and they said something really powerful that was saying, relationships are currency, like they should be able to buy you certain things. And when I think about in the context of work, I think about, relationship is able to buy you advocacy. If you have strong relationships with people, people value your work, they will be in rooms that you will never be in, but actually it's the relationship that will allow them to speak on your behalf, or the relationship that will allow you to get a certain opportunity or certain recommendation. So, I think that's what I see relationship capital as. And I, came into investment banking, not knowing anybody that worked in the industry, but over the, since 2008, I've been able to build really strong relationships. So for me, I value that above anything. And because of the role that I did before at the charity, there are many people across, the industry that could probably attribute some of their, coming into the industry because of the work I did with them. And for me, that's hugely valuable. And their relationships that, that have given me a lot of goodwill. So I've really seen the benefit of it. And, so I really work with people so that they can have the confidence and the tools to build strong professional relationships. I think they're very different from friendships. And sometimes people struggle with that. They think, everyone has to be your friend. And it's like, no, you wouldn't have to be your friend, but you do have to have the ability to build strong relationships with people. And I think this is something that isn't taught in the classroom, but it's an area that people really struggle with. So I think, this is almost, a way of working that can really give people the confidence to do that.
And I know you've got a process, haven't you, for doing it consciously, but perhaps before we go into that, that's quite an interesting thing that you're saying there. So many people might think, I've got good relationships at work, but that's friends at work. And even if I think of things like the Gallup engagement survey, they sort of thought, I have the best friend at work. But you're talking about something that's a conscious process by the sounds of things.
Yeah, and I think especially from, when you do come from such a different background. So I am, a Black woman, like I said, I didn't know anybody in banking before I came. Sometimes you can struggle with the fact that, oh, everybody has to be like you, or, you have to be into the same things. And I don't necessarily subscribe to that. I think in the workplace, you go to a workplace and you don't choose your team, you don't choose your manager, but actually the skill you need is the ability to be able to work with different types of people. Now, that's ultimately a skill. So I think people need to get out of their head of, everybody has to be my best friend, and because you don't get to choose. So I think it's really important mindset and know that we can have very good working relationships, respectful working relationships that create value for our team, our organizations. But I don't need to be so hung up that everybody needs to be my best friend. And I think that is important. I think people do sometimes find that difficult.
So, I mean, that means that actually we all work with people who have different personalities from us, and some of them we might not find all that easy. We wouldn't necessarily choose to be friends with, but you would invest more in building a strong professional, or you would invest in having a relationship with people regardless. Is that what you're saying?
Definitely. 100%. I think, if I'm on a team, I should know broadly what people do, what challenges they're working on, what projects they're working on. I should invest that time to get to know them, understand how I may be able to help them, because again, that is going to foster a better, more productive work environment.
And did this come naturally to you, or is this something you've consciously decided to do?
So it's funny you say that, because last week or a couple of weeks ago, I've just recently started a leadership program that I'm like a participant on. And one of the things that they got us to do was the Gallup Strengths Survey. And one of my strengths is woo, which is winning others over. And so I feel like actually this framework that I've developed over time is actually teaching people how to be a woo, like kind of profile. So I think I've always, kind of love to meet new people. I've loved the challenge of kind of winning people over. And so when I read like the description of what that actually means, I can see actually this is what I think comes very naturally to me. And I recognize that it doesn't come naturally to everybody. So I'm trying to put it in a framework that actually, if I am not naturally that way inclined, I can pick up these principles, apply them, and get the results. Because I think whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, I think when it comes to the world of work, you can't shy away from relationships because you don't operate in a vacuum.
Absolutely. It's interesting because funnily enough, I'm not sure how many people know the Gallup relationships thing. I have Woo. And I was wondering whether you had connectedness. There was another one that I was wondering whether there was something there in terms of this bringing people together, maybe slightly going off there.
My top five, connectedness was not there. It was actually maximizer. So I don't know whether it's the maximizer in me that, kind of connects the dots and brings, kind of people together, able to distinguish what could be the best possible outcome quite quickly.
Yeah. Very interesting. Okay, so I won't go down that rabbit hole. It's just something I find very interesting, but that's great to have that insight. So there is something that you naturally have, that strength that you have turned into. You are maximizing it in this environment, but that doesn't stop other people from doing the same, does it? So I guess though, some people don't do this, and I guess maybe because it doesn't come as naturally to them. And you said some people are in their heads earlier. But when you're working with people or developing or training people, what do you think stops them from building strong relationships?
Yeah, so when I actually run these workshops, I love asking in the beginning when I start, like what people find most challenging. And I think first of all, people often talk about building relationships as networking, and I actually specifically shy away from that. I think networking sounds very fleeting, quite transactional, whereas I like to reframe people's view on it and say it's building relationships. So it's a process, there's no pressure that something needs to happen now, it's done over time. And I always ask them, what do you find most challenging when it comes to networking? Because that's probably the phrase that they're more kind of, used to, or building relationships. And I was actually looking at this before we got on this call, and, some of the, verbatim, what people have said is, it seems very transactional, can seem fake. Reaching out is also a challenge, initiating conversations, talking to older people. So I do this with students, people that are about to enter the world of work, people in the workplace. I think people find it really difficult, that generational gap. Am I going to have anything to say? A big theme is also around maintenance. So maintaining the relationship after, the initial connection. How do you keep it going? Etiquette. So these are kind of definitely common themes that people have. And, when I do this, it's always the same things that come up. And I really reassure people, everybody has the same, preoccupation. So know that you're all in the same boat, and you just have to get over that and, to really see the results. But those are kind of like the common themes that kind of really hold people back.
And do you think that people who have ended up remaining remote, so lots of our listeners might be working remotely, I guess in HR, you do end up having to connect with the people anyway because of how you're working with them. But do you think that has made it harder for people to build strong relationships, or is there a different skill to building relationships when we are working remotely?
I think you probably just have to up the intentionality. You have to be very intentional. But actually, I found COVID was, during COVID, I was doing a 12-month contract, maternity cover. And actually, it was a great opportunity for me to build relationships globally. We would often hop on a Zoom call. I would see people I didn't know. And that was my excuse to kind of reach out to them on Slack and say, hey, like we should have they say something that I find interesting. Let's have a one-to-one catch up. So actually, one thing that I like in the virtual world is that you've kind of broken down the barriers of distance. So again, LinkedIn and people are more, much more, happy to jump on a Zoom call, half an hour, you can make that connection. So, there were some relationships that during COVID that I built that I'd never met in person, but were really strong relationships. So I don't think it's necessarily harder. I do think you need to be more intentional, and you can be more bold. And, there are things I've written an article on LinkedIn. I write kind of a lot around these themes. And one of the articles I wrote was, how do you write an invitation to connect request that gets a response on LinkedIn? Because again, so it's not just I would like to request with you, it's being intentional about how are you going to get that person's attention? What is it that you're saying, or what is it that you're offering that's kind of offering value that will make that person respond to you? So there are kind of strategies I think you can, practically use to do that.
Yeah, I think that's very valid, because there are quite a lot of people who reach out on LinkedIn with very
generic response, and you feel like someone's trying to there is a difference between building a relationship for a relationship's sake, which may evolve into some positive collaboration, than people who are these sort of imitation in-mails that you get where people are overly friendly, inappropriately friendly, and I know that they want to sell something to me. So there is a sort of balance. I'm sure you'll receive those inbox mails occasionally.
And I think when it comes to building, like, I think one of the great things that the online world can do, especially if maybe you're coming from a background where you aren't that connected, or maybe you don't have the right connections, is I think a platform like LinkedIn, you can put yourself out there in a way that can almost attract the right people into your network. So the people that you are aspiring, mentors, thought leaders that maybe are in the same space as you. So, this year I've been really focused on talent development. And one of the things I've been wanting to do is really connect to other thought leaders in this space. So again, if I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I think this is even the reason how you and I connected. I listened to a fantastic podcast you did, and I reached out on LinkedIn. But again, it's, getting over that barrier of, if I reach out, what if they don't, respond? But again, I think it's being intentional, and again, employing certain strategies that is more likely to get a positive response.
In terms of because you coach people and facilitate things, we've established that you are, you find this naturally, but you've evolved almost a natural process here, and you train people in it, don't you? So could you share for our listeners, if people want to do more in this space, what they could do to be better at it? I know you writing things, well, read your blogs, or your LinkedIn blogs, because that will give you tips for LinkedIn. But talk us through your little process.
Yeah, so I think what I would do is I'll go through the 5-point framework that I use. And before using this, I always to kind of just encourage people why they should do this. So there are 2 things I say about relationships. I say, everything you need is a conversation away. And I think especially, you can sit there, you can research everything, but sometimes, the solution is sitting next to you and you just haven't had the right conversation. Yeah. So it's about being intentional with your conversations. And the second thing I say is, strong professional relationships are like bridges, and they will help you cross over to where you need to get to. So oftentimes when you come to a crossroad in your career, it's a relationship that can kind of unlock, kind of the next stage. So again, it is really important. So with that at the back of our minds, the 5-point framework, it's not rocket science. It's actually very simple. But my whole point is that the skill is bringing them all together and doing them consistently. And if you can do that over time, you will have very strong relationships. So even as I'm walking through this framework, think about the person that has fantastic relationships. I'm sure they're doing some of these things, or if not all of them. So the first thing, and where I can, maybe I'll share some stories just to bring it to life. But the first thing in the framework is what I call your no. So I always tell people, know your no. And the no part of the framework really challenges people to be highly intentional, to the point that you are very deliberate in your actions and your choices. So, know what you want to get out of your career at the moment. When you take a new job, know, why am I taking this job? When you start a new year or a new, kind of review cycle, how do you want to grow over the next 6 months? So it's really kind of being intentional about what you want and having a clear idea of that. And I think what always helps is actually writing it down. So sometimes it's easy to think, in your head, it, but writing it down just brings, that sense of clarity. So I think that's really important. Know what you know. Even, on a micro level, you're about to jump on a call as an HR professional, know what you want to get out of the meeting. So I will often write down questions that I want to ask. I may even write down, what we need to be agreed upon. So it's very clear. I'm going in with a very clear intention. So I think just when you are clear on your no, your antenna is up and you're able to spot opportunities, spot people that could be helpful to helping you achieve your goals. So that's number one. And a lot of people don't really get time to be intentional because they're always firefighting. So really carve time out to think. The second part of the framework is you have to be willing to connect boldly and broadly. And I think this comes back to the fact that you don't get to choose who you work with. You don't get to choose who is in your industry. So if you want to have strong professional relationships, you have to be willing to connect with a broad range of people, because somebody may sit in a seat that is helpful to the work that you're doing, and you have to be able to connect with them. And I think there is actually probably a general deficiency in the workplace in doing that, because actually everybody is used to being with people that are very similar to them, same perspectives. But I think as our workplaces become more diverse, this is going to become even more important. And, you know, for me at the age of 10, I went from inner city London into a boarding school where I was the only Black girl in my year. And for me, that was really my grounds to really practice that skill. So I don't have difficulty in meeting new people, talking to them, being curious about people. And I think when you think about your work, you know, seek to connect with people both internally and externally. So internally, you know, if you're in a global organization, do you know everyone that does your role globally? Have you got a relationship with them? You should. You know, that's a great starting point. You know, it's going to be easy for you to connect with them, talk about things that you have. And then external peers, who does your role externally at a competitor that you could maybe build and forge those relationships with? So like I said, I think LinkedIn is a great platform to do that. So just making sure that you are connecting with people as you know, kind of navigate the world of work. So that's number two. And I think sometimes that can be the most daunting because you just don't know how people are going to respond. And then the third one is about sharing information about yourself. So again, once you've been very intentional, you've started thinking about what you want, you have to be willing to share that. You know, it needs to move from your head, you know, to people around you. And I think once you are more intentional and proactively in carving time out, that will come naturally. But then you need to start thinking about, you know, if I want to achieve this in my career, if I want to, you know, deliver this project, who needs to know? Who do I need to speak to? You know, and I think you can just be much more proactive and intentional in sharing about this. Also, you know, one of the things I found is when I moved from the charity to, you know, the in-house HR role, I was very intentional about sharing my experiences that I had that were beyond the role that I was sitting in. So I was in a recruitment role, but actually I had all this experience around diversity, inclusion, talent development, and being willing to kind of, you know, put forward those ideas. So I remember when COVID hit, you know, banks were getting ready to cancel their spring programs because people didn't know how they were going to cope. And actually the solution that I proposed was very similar to a program I had run when I was at my previous organization. So just being willing to share that, you know, proactively was a game changer for me because it allowed me to add a lot of value. And I think that leads me to point 4, is that of the framework is that you have to be a person that leads with value, you know. And I think when we think about the things that people find challenging, you know, they say, you know, can come across as very transactional, you know, and they feel guilty for asking for people's time. But I always say, you know, be a person of value. You know, if you want to build strong relationships, it's about, you know, adopting this mindset shift where you are always thinking, how can I help? You know, do I see something where I know that I can easily get involved? I can easily help. Put your hand up, put yourself forward. And I think it's very counterintuitive to how we're kind of raised, or like the school system is very individualistic. You know, it's the pressure to achieve your goals, your grades. But then actually when you step out into the real world, your ability to deliver value and be valuable is what will drive your success. Yeah. So again, it's like, how can you do you genuinely go out of your way to help people? And what does this look like? For me, it's, I get a piece of information. If it's not for me, rather than just putting it to the side, who else may benefit from this information? You know, I sit in an HR team. Everybody has different roles. So we always get bombarded with, you know, kind of, you know, information about comp and ben, you know, just different types of, you know, HR information. And even though I know that it's not for me, I will always kind of signpost to my colleagues and say, just sharing this in case it's interesting, you know, in case it's valuable. So I think it's just getting used to, you know, being helpful to people. And I think when you operate like this, it actually makes it easier for you to ask people for help because you know that you are genuinely helpful. So I always say, be a person that leads with value. And at the end, I can maybe share practical things as to what that looks like. And then the last point is about follow-up. So the 5th part of the framework is the follow-up. So this is where, you know, we address the maintenance piece of relationships. How do you maintain relationships? So Lucinda, you and I may have a conversation today. I may get information about you. Maybe there's nothing immediate that comes to mind, but maybe in a couple of weeks, I come across a piece of information that reminds me of Lucinda. It's about me going out of that way to act on that thought and flagging it to you, sharing it with you. So just doing what you said you're going to do and in a timely and a promptly way. And again, if I'm asking somebody maybe for an introduction, one of the things that I can do as a follow-up is I can actually write what I want you to say. I can make it easy for you to action follow-up. But unless people follow up, things don't get done. So again, the last thing is really the follow-up. Don't leave things in the air. You know, make sure that you drive things forward. And that is very valuable to making things happen. And, you know, I always say, kind of coming back to the last point on leading with value, always try to be featured in someone's story. Like, can people say Lucinda was the one that helped me, get this, or Lucinda was the one that introduced me to this? And that's the person I want to be. And I found that it's been hugely beneficial for my relationships.
It's interesting, actually, we've both been training. That's you feel like you've made a difference to somebody if years later they say, oh, you taught me this on that course and it made a difference in something, and they remember. But that's not me consciously following up. I think it's a great thing. I personally think the follow-up bit is probably one of the hardest things. I mean, do you have a strategy for doing that? Do you intentionally, I don't know, of these people to do it, or do you just find it comes naturally?
So I think my motto is like Nike, so just do it. So if I'm like, I'm going to make an introduction, I will do it there and then. I probably use, if let's say I'm introducing two people in my network and they're both on WhatsApp, I may kind of do a WhatsApp intro and leave a voice note. So trying to make it quicker for myself. So, how can you make it more speedy? But I think it's just about doing it when you said, and if it's a follow-up that has to happen later down the line, diarize it, put it down, make sure that, you're not going to forget it, or when it comes to you, make sure you do it. But I think the follow-up piece is the hardest, but it's the piece that, you should definitely do. And, follow-up is even going back to say thank you. Somebody gave you a piece of advice. Yesterday I was there and I got a message on LinkedIn, and it was somebody that had been to one of the workshops and had asked me questions after the workshop and was like, the question he asked me about, they just had the conference and it went really well. And it was just so heartwarming. And it's like, for me as the recipient of that kind of inspires me to continue to invest in you, because it shows me that, you're learning and, you're grateful for the time that I've invested in you.
It totally solidifies it, doesn't it? So then, just to summarize your process before I go on to ask you certain top tips for anybody who wants to do more about this. So you're saying basically your process is, first of all, be intentional. So know what it is you need to know before you get on a call or something like that. Think about what it is you're looking for. I love your statement, connect boldly and broadly. So, just do it, get out, go jump out of silos and things like that. If you're in an organization or different groups, be interested more broadly. You talked about sharing information. I think that's also quite important for building trust, isn't it? Being just open about things there. Lead with value. So think about how you can be helping to others as opposed to what you're going to get from others. So it's not transactional. So that's the key. And then really, really importantly, follow up, just do it in terms of that. So I really like that process. I think that's great. Just as we wrap up the episode, what are the top tips we've got for people out there thinking, oh, I know I should do more about this? There's still a little bit in the networking mindset as opposed to relationship building mindset. What other top tips have you got for people?
Sure. Maybe what I will do is just like, according to the framework, a few practical things people could do. So I think under the no, maybe just spend time, 10 minutes, spend time thinking about what do you currently want in your career? What profile of person do you want to meet? So it doesn't necessarily have to be, who they are, but maybe I want to meet somebody that has worked in DEI and talent development. I want to meet that person. You're just bringing it to the conscious, write it down if possible, and also be willing to share with people. On the connect boldly and broadly, one thing I would say is, think about who you work with. Connect with everybody that you work with on LinkedIn. Everybody that you like, just your immediate team. People move, and again, their networks broaden, and that indirectly broadens your network. But make sure you're connected with everyone in person on LinkedIn as a minimum, I think is important. And then try reaching out to someone who inspires you on LinkedIn. Like, there have been times where I've read FT articles, or, I've listened to a podcast and I've literally just gone to that person's page, searched their name, and then, maybe they've reposted it, I can engage with it and then send them a response. So try to engage with them. And again, read that article and just put yourself out there, see what comes off the back of it. But don't be afraid to, reach out to people. And then from the share information about yourself, I would say, once you've written down, your aspirations, what you want to achieve, share it with someone in your organization beyond your friend. Is it your HR, kind of colleague, or your HR business partner, or is it a sponsor, a mentor? And I actually, wrote an article called 5 Conversations You Should Be Having in the Workplace. So again, it could be, sharing a piece of work that you've done with a peer in a different location and just seeing if they're interested in, hearing more about it. And then I think, just take a moment to reflect about, what is it that you may wish to share about yourself that people may not know about you? the Johari window talks about like the different elements, and one is the hidden area, and that is what you reveal. You reveal what you want to. Are there certain experiences that you've had that could be really helpful to certain projects that are happening in the organization that are beyond your role? Put your hand up, let people know your strengths, your ideas. So don't be afraid to share things. And then on the lead with value, I always encourage people, try for a week on LinkedIn, you scroll through information. If there's anything that you see that is not for you, just stop and think, whose attention can you bring it to? And then, if you go to a networking event, be in the room for your entire network. Speak to people. You speak to someone not helpful to you, who else could it be helpful to? And be willing to make that introduction. And that is where the follow-up comes into it. And then on the follow-up, just, try being prompt in your follow-up. Carve out time for meeting new people. If somebody says, we should have a catch-up, you be the one to follow up and get the time in the diary. So that's one thing that if someone says, oh, we should catch up, just let's find the date now and get it in the diary. When we're working on projects that work, just try to diarize things so that they're in and things, maintain momentum.
Really, really good advice. I was thinking about that sharing information thing, or just being that person connecting others. When someone does that for you, you think, hang on, what do you want? That's really helpful. Oh, I know someone, would you like me to put you in contact? That's so helpful. That's such a massive deposit in someone's emotional bank account. If someone kind of proactively offers to do it, you almost kind of feel there's this whole reciprocity thing. Almost people feel that you're expecting something back. So if you don't, and it does come back down the line, it is a really powerful way of investing in a relationship. I can see all those tips were really, really helpful. Tracey, I'm sure that this is going to be quite inspirational for a number of people listening. So if people want to reach out to you, because that would be a first part of them learning from this, how can they get hold of you? Obviously, we'll put things like some of your profiles and these links in our show notes, but is it LinkedIn? What's your best way of
LinkedIn? I'm very active on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn, and I do generally try to get back to everyone that, messages and is genuinely interested. So please feel free to connect on LinkedIn. There's lots of articles there. So have a look through. But I think relationships really is a key that can unlock so many things in our careers and give us a really kind of meaningful, enriching career and allow us to get things done.
Fabulous. Tracey, thank you so much for coming on the HR Uprising podcast.
Thank you, Lucinda. Absolute pleasure.
I really hope you found this week's episode useful and enjoyable. If you did, perhaps you could recommend us to a friend or colleague, or give us a review on your platform of choice. It really helps new listeners to find us. Now you can access links to any of the information mentioned in this show via the website www.hruprising.com. Further free resources are also available at www.actus.co.uk. There you can also find out more about our software and training solutions. Finally, why not join our LinkedIn group, the HR Uprising, to share ideas and collaborate with other like-minded people professionals. Thank you for listening to the HR Uprising podcast.